To start with, it doesn't really matter whether you're on PC or Mac. Both of them have a different application that you can do this with. Typically, before we actually create a page, we often will already have our written content prepared. So if you haven't created any written content yet, it's not a bad idea to write up something. I just wrote up something kind of silly to start with about why I dislike fire ants. We'll put that back over there for now. And our end result is just going to be a simple web page that looks kind of like this and has a little button here that we can pop up to have text appear. File. So not a website where you have lots of pages that are interconnected, but just a single web page. So this is a very basic beginner type of exercise that you can try out. Now we're going to create this in HTML, and we're going to use just a touch of JavaScript just to kind of play with it a little bit. HTML is a markup language, and JavaScript is a programming language. You can look more into that later if you want to know the exact specifics. I don't feel like going into it right now because I don't want this to be too lengthy. But basically, HTML, you build the content with it. JavaScript can make it interactive. The third language that we often talk about when we talk about the web is CSS, which we often use to make websites pretty. But we're not going to worry about that right now because that's a whole extra level of complexity that I'm not going to deal with for this video. There are, of course, other languages you can use. You can use Python, you can use Java, you can use Ruby, you can use PHP. There's tons of languages now with the web, but those are still the primary three that most web pages use. We're not going to do anything super fancy. We're not going to worry about trying to find a special editor or anything. We're actually just going to use stuff that you should already have on your computer. So since I'm on a Mac, I am looking for, where'd it go? TextEdit, here we go. If you're on a PC, you're going to be looking for Notepad. Now on a Mac you have Pages, and on a PC you also have WordPad and Word, assuming you bought Word. We don't want to use those. We want to use TextEdit or Notepad. Now if you're in Notepad, you shouldn't have all these extra options. Right now this looks more like WordPad. On the Mac, they're kind of two programs in one. So what we have to do is we have to change this so we don't have all of these options, because this is going to cause problems when you try to write our code, because in this format there's extra code behind all of this, and that's a problem because we don't want this extra code. So we're going to go up here to TextEdit, and we're going to choose Preferences, and we're going to tell Plain Text, and I'm actually going to pretty much check all of these off just so they don't cause problems, because sometimes they can. Do they always? Not necessarily, but just to keep it simple, let's go ahead and check all of them off. Once you know what you're doing, you can try playing with them on your own later, but for now I would say let's just do that. I'm also going to change my plain text font just to be something larger so it's easier for you to see, but you can leave it the way it is and that will be fine. I think that should be pretty nice. We'll go to Open and Save. This looks okay, except I'm going to take this off because we're not going to be creating a .txt, we're going to be creating a .html. So I'll click that, and we should be okay. Alright, so right now it looks the same, right? Well, my text is different, but this looks the same. So it's only going to make those changes once we actually create a new file. So I'll go ahead and Command Q, or I could go up here and tell it to quit. Don't save. And I'm going to relaunch it. Alright, so this is what we want. We have just this plain empty box here with no formatting options, no formatting text. Just like that. That's perfect. If you're on a PC, that's what Notepad should look like as well. When we're creating an HTML document, there are different things that we can do with this. Basically at the start, there's a specific format that we should be using. It's preferred to use it, and not using it could cause some issues, but your browser's pretty forgiving. So if you make a mistake, it's going to try to load it anyways. It might load it wrong, but it's going to try. So if I just write that, and I do File Save, and I call this test.html, we now have that somewhere on my desktop. Here it is. test.html. If we open this with like Firefox or something, it works. It's here, but that's not the ideal way to do this. So I'm going to go back into TextEdit, and I'm going to add a bit more to this. So I'm going to start out by writing HTML at the top inside of these angle brackets. And that's how we define an HTML tag, just with angle brackets. And since I've opened it, I need to close it as well. So open HTML, close HTML. We close a tag by using this slash here. So the next thing that we have in a document is the head, which we just write as head. And once again, if I open it, I need to close it. And then after that, we have the body of the document. And that's where this would go. This is a test that would go in there. In HTML and in programming in general, we often call like extra space white space. And in HTML, the white space actually doesn't matter. It won't do anything, but we can use it just to make things easier for us. So by indenting all of these, this is typically showing that these are all inside of this. By indenting this a bit further, they're not quite even, there we go. By indenting this a bit further, we're showing that this is inside of this. It doesn't actually matter to the computer doesn't care, but it makes it a little bit easier for us to read as coders. Now what we can also do is in the head, we can create a title. And if I just press tab, that will give me that little space, that indentation. And I have to close out title. Since I opened a title, I have to close it. Almost every tag you should close. There's a couple that you don't, but for the most part, if you open a tag, you need to close it. So I'll just double tab for right now, just to show that that's inside of there. This is the title for my page. And if I save this, and if I go back to Firefox, right now the title right here is actually an abbreviated version of the file path instead of an actual title. But now that I've created a title up here, if I press refresh, now you can see the title is loading inside of the tab up here. So that's how you do a title. Now we can also put stuff here inside of the body. So we could do like an h1 tag, which is a header tag, and of course we have to close it. And inside of here I might put, this is the header. And then maybe after that, I just want to put a paragraph tag, which P is the tag for that. And once again, close it. This is a paragraph. Actually, it's not a paragraph, but it can just be a placeholder for right now. So I'll go ahead and save this. And I'll open Firefox again. And if I refresh it, there you go. So we have a header, and we have some blank space here, or we have a placeholder for what could be a paragraph of writing. This is what I'm working on so far, but I've also actually already prepared some written copy here to use. So here's something that I just threw together earlier, and this will be today's things that I dislike. I actually like most things, but I felt that this would be a fairly amusing topic to write or to create. Today's things that I dislike. And it will be red imported fire ants. And so here's sort of my body text. And instead of retyping the whole thing, I'm just going to copy and paste what I've previously prepared into here. So there we go. The spacing's a little bit weird because the indentions aren't there, but it is what it is. So I could go and indent these myself if I wanted to kind of keep up with that white space convention, but I don't necessarily have to. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'll open Firefox again, and I'll refresh it, and there we go. Now, this doesn't look exactly like it does here, and the reason why is because, once again, white space doesn't matter. all of this spacing that I made, this line break, this empty thing here, none of that actually matters to the program itself. None of it matters to the software. It's only for us, the coder. So if we want it to actually do something, if we actually want these breaks in here, we need to actually tell them to exist. So like for this one, I could do /p, and then that will close that paragraph, and then open a new paragraph tag. And down here, I could once again close this paragraph tag and open a new paragraph tag. And the same thing down here. All right. And I can press enter here, and I can tab these over, and I can press enter there and tab these over, and etc. just to keep my white space the way that I like. Once again, this white space doesn't do anything, so it's not going to mess up the way it actually displays because it's just for me. So if I do Command S to save and I refresh this, much closer. Now it's still not perfect because I have a line break here and I have a line break there, and they're not showing here. So once again, white space. Now I don't want a big gap like there is here. I want there to be a little bitty gap. So what I do for that is BR, which is for break. So that will create a break between this line and this line and this line and that line. And so now if I hit Command S again and I refresh this, there we go. That's much closer to how I wanted. And now for the last little bit, I'm just going to add a little bit of JavaScript. And like I said earlier, JavaScript allows a web page to be interactive. It allows things to be a little bit more dynamic. Now this can get extremely complicated, and we're not going to do anything extremely complicated because we've just started looking at this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in an alert. Alerts are those obnoxious pop-ups that you see on websites. Well, at least that's where they started from. Some of them are very sophisticated and they're doing a lot more than just an alert, but this is kind of the origin, so to speak. We're just going to build this right inside this HTML file. We could write a separate file, but we're not going to. We're going to have it right inside, so we're going to do scripts. And once again, if we open it, we're going to close it, so scripts. And then inside of here, inside of the script tag, we're just going to add an alert. So that will be alerts and parentheses, opening and closing the parentheses. And inside of here, we're going to put a string. And the string is going to say, hey, welcome to my article about today's dislike. And this title will be today's thing I dislike. I guess we'll be consistent. We'll add that there. And if we save this and we refresh this, now we get this little pop-up, and when we press OK, then we actually get the rest of the site that loads. So that's kind of neat, I guess, although it can be obnoxious if it is not used properly. For example, I could put another one of these, and you know, maybe I mean well. Maybe this is like welcome, and this is like hey there friend, and maybe I've got another one in here that's like hope you like it, and maybe I've got another one that's like check back soon, right? And so maybe I have a lot of them, and that can quickly become obnoxious as you're clicking through and waiting for them to go away. So you don't want to annoy your users, so you have to use them responsibly. And the way that most people prefer to use them is by not using them. But you can use them, they're fairly interesting. Now what we can also do is, instead of having them just happen right at the very start, we could instead define a function. Inside of our script tag, because this is still JavaScript, HTML can't do functions, JavaScript can, because programming language versus not a programming language, we do function, and we could call this using an alert, just to be very clear about what we're doing. Open and close parentheses. We're going to open what we call a curly brace. That's this thing here. And of course, just like before, if we open a curly brace, then we need to close the curly brace. Inside of this JavaScript, we also, once again, typically have this white space to make it very clear that all of this is inside of there. Not required, but it just makes things easier to read. So now if we save this and we refresh this, nothing happens because we've defined this as a function, but we've never called the function. Now what we can do instead is inside of our actual page, we could actually create a button that will call this function. So I'm going to do input type, and this is going to be button. And when you click it, we want it to actually call that function. So we're going to do onClick. And what we put inside of the onClick is going to be the name of the function. Whatever we wrote here has to go in here. So using an alert. And then, of course, the open and close parentheses, because that is actually part of the name. And then we're going to put a value, and that's just going to be a string. That string is actually going to be what the button says. So, like, name of button can go here. So now if we save this and we refresh this, now we have a button, and if we click it, we get these alerts that we had created. So maybe I want to make this a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interesting, and instead of having all of this down here, maybe instead I have this here. Why? Because they're invasive, damaging, and very bitey. And here I could have learn more with double exclamation point just for fun. So we'll just grab these parts here that we had in the paragraphs, and I'm going to go ahead and put them inside of these alerts. Once again, this may not be the prettiest thing to do with them, but it creates a little bit more interactivity and could be an interesting way to display it and kind of experiment with things. And so now I'll cut and paste that one into this alert. Oh, I just did the same one twice. That's okay. So this is the next one. So cut, Command X, and Command V. I'm just going to delete this white space. And then lastly, this one here. And we'll just delete this white space as well. And I guess I'll just change this last alert to maybe thanks for reading. Now down here I still have all these paragraph tags, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those because I don't need them anymore. And Command S to save, and I'll refresh this. And now we have a very different setup, and if I click Learn More, now we get these little pop-ups that have this information that was previously on the page. And there we go. Now you might say, why did I delete this white space? Well, because I had it formatted down here, it wasn't quite matching up here and it was looking a little weird. But if I add it back in, let's take a look and see what happens. And I'll go ahead and save it. And I'll refresh this before I do the rest, just so we can make sure that we know how it's going to behave. It actually doesn't like that. It actually broke the alert itself. So even though whitespace doesn't matter to HTML, it can cause issues with JavaScript. So if I instead decide to do spaces, Will that work? And the issue is, without ever putting a line break in, it's never going to actually create any space there, or unless I put a period in or something, we're never going to get past this. So it is what it is. So I'll delete these line breaks, and if I Command S and I refresh again, we're good again. So it is what it is.